Anyone who's ever done anything worth doing has dreamed big, failed mightily, and mostly started from humble beginnings. This is a podcast about such people. The most fascinating podcast in the world is fascinating because of the stories of the human beings. Hello, everybody. It's Pat DiCerbo, the most fascinating podcast in the world. Has nothing to do with me. It has to do with the people that agree to speak to me on this podcast. And today we have one of the most fascinating people I've ever met. His name is Brett Bissell. I met Brett Bissell at Union College in 1984, I want to say, maybe 85. And Brett was born in Liberia in Africa. And his parents were both missionaries, and they eventually moved to Guilderland, New York, not far from the Schenectady, Albany area, and then Voorheesville, New York. And Brett and I were the same year at Union College, class of 1988. And he has a bachelor's of science in electrical engineering, which I always felt in school had the smartest kids. I always felt that was the hardest major. And he has a master's in electrical engineering from MIT and an MBA from MIT. Welcome, Brett.
Thank you, Pat. It's great to be here with you.
My pleasure. And I neglected to say, Brett is married to Sandra, and they have 3 children, Kyle, Eric, and Rachel, and currently live in Florida, Central Florida.
Yep.
But one of the things that we talked about not long ago, and that we corresponded about as well, is after you were done with school. I'm assuming this was after you were done at MIT, when you were looking for a job.
After Union.
Internationally. After Union.
After Union, yeah.
So Brett went 0 for 40 in his first 40 attempts to get a job internationally. So could you talk a little bit about that, like what you were looking for, why the odds were so steep against it, and so on and so forth?
Sure. You know, while at Union, I did 2 terms abroad. First, I went to France, and then in my sophomore year, and then Finland in my senior year on a work study program. And I think it's probably my international upbringing with my parents, living internationally and then pulling me along. I always just wanted to be international, and those 2 terms abroad really, increased that desire. And so, I kind of decided that I had an engineering degree, and I wanted to travel the world, and I was going to get someone to help me pay for it. And so I really kind of fixed my sights on only international roles. So I was scouring back in those days. We used the classifieds, so the Boston newspapers and the New York newspapers, and scoured the classifieds for opportunities, and everything I found that had some kind of an international bent, I applied to. And you remember well, back in those days, you sent cover letters and your resume, and you sent it off in the post, and you kind of waited to see if something would happen, right? And usually you'd get a very polite no thank you letter back. I did that for probably almost 6 months after graduation, while working part-time to pay the bills. And then ultimately I went along with some union friends to a job fair focused on Japan. And I had no experience at all with Japan. I'd never been. I didn't speak the language, but I had a lot of friends that had been, and they convinced me to go along to this job fair. And I remember walking around and meeting various companies, and it was all semiconductor companies back then. It was a lot of high tech, and I remember meeting the HR folks from Toshiba at the time, and the guy in the booth asked me, a Japanese gentleman, he said, Japan's so different. What makes you think you can live in Japan? You've never been there. And I said, well, I lived 10 years in West Africa. I think I could handle it. He said, yeah, you're probably right. So
Mhm.
um, they ended up giving me a job offer, and I later got another offer from GE as well to be an international field engineer. Um, but the Toshiba opportunity just seemed so much more of an adventure to go live in Kawasaki and live in a dorm and interact with a purely Japanese office and coworkers, and so there was no question in my mind that was the one I was going to take. And
Mhm.
so May of the year after we graduated, I got on the plane at JFK and with a suitcase, and off I went.
So that was May of 1989.
May of
So one
'89.
year,
Yes,
almost 2 years.
yeah, and
So when you say you lived in a dorm, was it like a company town kind of like in Kawasaki?
not
There
quite a
was
town, but
dorms.
Toshiba was huge in that area in Kawasaki.
Mhm.
They probably the biggest hirer in that, or employer in that city, and
Mhm.
they had a number of company dormitories because in those days they didn't pay very much to their employees, but they would provide them with room and board, and so the dorm would be 6 tatami mats, which is kind of 3 feet by 6 feet long, and that would be the space of the room. No bathrooms. The bathrooms would be downstairs. There'd be a huge hot bath on ofuro, big bathtub that everybody would use, and common shower area, and then a cafeteria. And most of the it was a men's dormitory. Most of the Japanese men would be 2 guys to a room, but for the foreigners, they were worried that we wouldn't be able to adapt, so they would put us one to a room. And there were probably 5 or 6 other foreigners at that time that were there. A number of young Irish guys, and then a couple Americans, and then I remember a Canadian and a British guy there. But Toshiba was trying to internationalize at the time, so they were bringing in all these young engineers to work. And this was the time, if you may recall, there had been a scandal with Toshiba, some subsidiary selling um, milling equipment to what turned out to be a Russian shell company that could have been used to make quiet submarine propellers. So
Mm.
the congressmen were smashing Toshiba boxes on the floor, on the stairs of Capitol Hill, with sledgehammers. So that was right when I was getting ready to head over to Japan. All my people I met would say, "You're going to Toshiba, really?" So it
That's
was a fantastic
crazy.
experience.
That's great. What do you remember when you first got there? Like, were you lonely at all, or did you fit right in? And how did
I
you learn
wasn't
the language?
lonely. I remember just so many lights. Like you'd be in the city and there'd just be neon everywhere. So many people. Not really a lot of noise most of the time, but relatively quiet. But um, just so much light. And other than being in a major train station, no English. There wouldn't be English signs or anything. And so the Irish guys kind of took me under their wing. They were great. They had been there for a year already, so they were kind of getting along in their Japanese skills, and taught me how to go to restaurants and order. In those days, they still have it too. They would have plastic food displays outside of the restaurants to kind of show what the main dishes were. And so I'd go into a restaurant and I'd drag the waitress out into the out to the street, and point to the dish that I wanted as that one. And I'd pay, and um it was a fantastic experience. I loved it. I don't think I was ever really lonely, because you're in a you're in a dorm
Mm-hmm.
with a lot of people your age, and people from work would take me out, on the weekends, or in the evening we'd go out, and they all wanted to practice their English. And a lot of really young um, guys that were my age, and young ladies, and we would go out and have a really fantastic time. So I don't think I ever felt lonely.
Interesting.
And one
So,
quick correction. I was actually born in the States, but my parents took me to Nigeria when I was 3 months old. I don't know if I probably didn't tell you that, but we went to Nigeria.
mm,
My parents were going to be missionaries, and so my first flight over on Pan Am was at 3 months old, and then there was a civil war in Nigeria. Uh, Probably a few months later. We probably weren't there for more than half a year, and then we were evacuated. My mom and I went first, and my dad went later on. Women and children first. So we were evacuated along with the oil workers, and then we moved to Liberia, probably when I was about a year old.
wow. Do you have memories of Liberia? I'm in the habit of
I
asking
do.
about
I do.
first memories. What do
Yeah.
you
My
remember? Yeah.
we lived in two places while we were there, but my earliest memories are from a town called Robertsport, which is on the coast of Liberia. It's a little town. As I said, my parents were missionaries. They were teachers. Um, so my parents taught in this little school there, and I remember the plane would land on they had corrugated like metal strips on the beach, big sheet metal strips, and the little Cessnas would land on the beach, and load and unload us. And so my first memories are of being in that house and playing in front of the house and looking down and being able to see the palm trees and the water goes kind of up on a hill. So I've got a few memories from there, and then many memories from the next place that we lived, which was a university campus in a place called Cuddington, in the interior of Liberia.
What was that like?
It was wonderful, Pat. It's just a crazy way to grow up, I guess. We were in a very international community. Because the faculty of the university were all international. So there were lots of Europeans, there was Indians, there were um, people from all over the world, and so my classmates we went to a faculty school um, there, and so my classmates were from all over the world, um, and we would we'd go to walk to school in the morning, and um, I remember just having an amazing field day, athletics, and just tramping around the university campus. And not many kids at 7 or 8 years old have their own machete, but I did. Going out with friends to go fishing, and I think back to the risks that I ran. Snakes and dangerous stuff, and we probably had all of that, but in those days there was no cell phones, no one was tracking you, so as long as you got home for dinner and everything was good, right?
Did you have to kill any snakes?
All the time. Well, all the time. Yeah,
Wow.
we definitely had cobras and um, mambas and scorpions, and sure, they
Wow.
were omnipresent.
In the woods by yourself or at home?
I remember even seeing, looking up into a tree over my head and seeing a cobra sitting, coiled up on the branch over my head, or my dad had stories of where one fell off the roof right in front of him. And I remember once stepping on a green mamba, and I think I scared him and he scared me, and we both ran the other way. But
Aren't the
yeah,
green mamas really poisonous?
they are. Yes, yeah. So yeah, all kinds of that stuff. So I think to the way we raised our kids and the way kids grow up now, and the risks that we ran, with all the various crazy stuff that we did. But it was wonderful. It was a great thing. And the crazy thing is, we'll talk about it, I'm sure, but with my wife being Brazilian, um, when I went to spend time with her in the north of Brazil many, many years later, which is a very centric part of Brazil, the food was very similar. Like it was palm oil and rice and the same kind of fruits and many of the same tastes. So it was a very strange experience to be in Brazil and have that some of those tastes that I hadn't had in decades come back to me.
You never forget that, right? It
Yeah.
just brings back
It
memories.
just brings back a flood of memories. You have this taste that this flavor that you haven't had in forever, and then instantly the flavor, or the smell and the memories come back when you have it. It was wonderful. So it's a fantastic experience or set of memories to have, and my brothers and sisters and I love to reminisce about it. I'm the oldest, so I probably remember the most, but we each have our own memories of those times.
So you moved up this area, the capital region, upstate New York. What are your first memories of Gilder and Voorheesville? Do you remember back then?
Cold. And I always had loved the outdoors and camping. So I remember I had joined, my parents had put me into a classroom. Actually, I'm jumping ahead. I think my first year back in fifth grade, I think it was complete culture shock, just absolute culture shock because, while we were in Liberia, there was no TV, no newspapers, no, sports scores, nothing, right? An occasional magazine would show up, my parents' house, and it was typically several years old or several months old by the time we'd gotten it. So, I'd get into, and my father never wanted to have a TV at home. So, we didn't have TV. And so I remember just being completely lost in class because kids would be talking about TV shows or sports or things like that. And, I like to read. And I think most of fifth grade, I just sat in the back of the classroom and read books. And, the teachers would leave me alone because they're like, okay, he's reading this, that's okay. But I have almost no memories of that. I did try out, baseball and obviously if you can think about a 10-year-old kid trying out baseball for the first time, it's a disaster, right? So learning how to catch and learning how to throw and hit. But sixth grade was better. I was starting to get a little bit more adapted and knew a little bit more about what was going on. And I joined an outdoor program in that year that they took us camping. Once a month we'd go on an outdoor trip from the homeroom, and I really, really loved that. So that helped me adapt a little bit more. But I do remember the cold. It was just just so cold. My dad bought us a sled and winter clothes to go out in the snow, and I think we'd stay out for a little while and then come back in and shiver. We did adapt, but it took a while, a couple of years.
So how'd you end up at Union College? What made you decide to go there?
I think I only applied to two places. I applied to Syracuse and I applied to Union. And I had a basketball coach in high school, Chuck Abba, who was just really, really influential for me. Just a really wonderful man, great leader, really great teacher. And he'd come from Union. I had an English teacher who'd come from Union as well. And I just had a great impression of it. And then it was financial as well. I got, very significant assistance to go to Union. My parents were missionaries. They didn't have, a lot of resources to pay for that. And so, Union was a wonderful option. And honestly, I think it was the best thing that could have ever happened to me. The international, programs, the term abroad programs, the mix of the students, the size of the classes. It was perfect for me at that time. I really felt at home very quickly.
What made you decide to go on that first term abroad? Did you seek it out, or did someone suggest it?
I did seek it out. I knew right away, and that was one of the things that was attractive at Union was the big term abroad program. And I first tried to go to the Bath, England program. I had taken French in high school, actually even in middle school, but I never was very good at it. In fact, I was terrible at it. So I thought I'd go for the English route, but the term was full, and I was going for my sophomore year. So um, that you kind of were low on the totem pole in terms of priorities for the term. And so then I said, okay, what the heck? I'll take another stab at French. That was a term that was still open. So I signed up for the French classes, and again, I was terrible at it. But I did manage to squeak through and got over to Rennes in the Brittany region, and something clicked for me there. I was staying, doing a homestay program, and suddenly it was easy for me to learn once I was there. In the classroom, it had been terrible. I was never good at it, but the second I was in it and surrounded by it, I think, my wife will tell me it's growing up internationally, like hearing other accents and hearing other, ways of speaking, but suddenly it was natural for me, and I realized I could learn a language, and then I picked it up very, very quickly. I was very comfortable, speaking to people and having people speak to me, and being conversations. And I don't think I was ever very great from a grammatical perspective, but I was very comfortable conversationally, um, and that confidence, carried over into other languages. So, while I was at Union, I ended up doing pretty much all of my liberal arts classes from in international settings, because as an engineer you don't have that many credits in liberal arts. But I just thought it was amazing. The faculty there were so flexible in helping me do that program, because they wanted kids to be international, and the faculty was so international in the engineering school. And then so I wanted to go back again, so I started looking for work programs. I could do a summer job, and there wasn't anything in France. And then I ran across this other program that was doing work study programs in Scandinavia. So I said, okay, what the heck? So I applied for that, and I ended up getting a job in a Finnish bank. The bank doesn't exist anymore, but I got a job in a Finnish bank starting in the summer and then going all the way through to Christmas. So I took Finnish language classes at the Helsinki Summer University, and I got credit for those as liberal arts credits. Again, the professors at Union were so flexible in making that work. So I was able to graduate on time, but did 2 semesters abroad while I was there. And I know you did semesters abroad too, so how
Great.
how much that means. It was just so wonderful to be, in a different environment.
Yeah, for sure. It was definitely encouraged. I think I may have told you I had to fight pretty hard to get into my second and third one. Well, not really. I mean, I just tried to negotiate with Professor Thomas, and eventually he said, put your name on a list, and if someone cancels, I'll call you. And I don't know if anyone canceled or not, but he called me, so I got to go
He
on
was
3.
wonderful. He was one of the key guys in helping me get into that program, along with Professor Redco from the engineering program. And they made it work. They thought it was really important, and they wanted to see students have that background, and they made it work. And so having had those 2 semesters abroad, I think while I was at Union, I was always kind of head down, doing engineering courses, because you had to fit a certain number of courses in. But I knew coming back from Finland, in the winter of our senior year, that I wanted to work internationally, and that's really when I said, okay, this is this is something I'm going to pursue and look for exclusively that if I can. And after about 6 months, my dad was kind of saying, hey, this may not be the thing that's going to work out. You might start looking for option B. But then, fortunately, right around that time, the opportunity with Toshiba came along.
Mm-hmm. So just so I remind myself and anyone who's listening, you speak Japanese because you went to Japan. You speak French because you studied in the classroom and went to France. You speak Finnish because you worked
A little
in
bit.
Finland.
Yep.
And then later in your career, which we're going to get to, you ended up working for quite some time in Brazil. And as a consequence, you speak Portuguese and you can at least fake it in Spanish.
Right. Yep.
So what happened? You worked in Japan for a while. But were you, when you were in Boston right after college, were you enrolled in school then, or did you go to Japan and then come back to Boston?
I went to Japan and then came back. So I went to Japan
Okay,
for
got it.
5 years, and
Okay.
so fresh out of school, my original plan was I'll go for 2 years and then come back and do a master's degree to kind of reintegrate and get a job locally. I never intended to go for more than 2 years, and then after 2 years, I met Sandra, and we
Mm-hmm.
we started dating,
And Sandra's Brazilian.
and Sandra's Brazilian. She's
She
Japanese,
speaks,
Italian, Brazilian, and
oh
she
boy. And
speaks,
so she
yeah,
speaks French or Spanish, Italian, Portuguese, Japanese, and English. Did I
yep.
leave anything out?
No, and well, when we started dating, we kind of spoke a mixture. She was learning Japanese, and she didn't grow up speaking Japanese. She's third generation. But we started dating kind of in a mixture of Japanese and English, which both languages she was learning.
Mm-hmm.
And then she gradually got better and better at English. And I was so we got to the point where we ended up speaking mostly a little bit of Japanese and in English. And we were together for the last 2 years that I was there. And right around that time, I decided to move to Motorola. So I worked for Motorola, the Toshiba for 3 years, and then Motorola for 2 years in Tokyo, in the same kind of engineering field. While we were dating then, and then I decided to go back and look at that master's degree again, and I couldn't make up my mind whether I wanted to do an engineering degree or an MBA. And so I started applying to dual degree programs, and there were several of those at the time. And I was super, super fortunate to get into the MIT program, which was called Leaders for Manufacturing. It was a dual degree, so 2 degrees in 2 years, like very intense, sessions. But you would get that at the end of 2 years. And so Sandra and I got married in the spring of '94. And so April of '94, we moved. We got married in Yokohama, and we moved back to Boston in May of '94 to start classes, and that's we moved to Cambridge. And
How many people went to your wedding?
it was pretty small, actually. My family came.
Mm-hmm.
They came over, and we had a secondary wedding in Schenectady also in
Mm-hmm.
August. But a couple of her cousins were in Japan, but we had our wedding in the Anglican church up on the bluff in Yokohama, and we had it during the Sunday morning service, which was really cool. It was a pretty interesting church that was run by it's called the Missions to Seamen, by the Anglican Church, where they go around to port cities around the world and minister to to sailors on the port ships. But this church was very historic from the early days of foreigners occupying Japan in Yokohama, and the priest was a Scottish gentleman, Father Berg, and it was really cool because a number of years later we went back with the kids, and the kids were young, and we kind of knocked on the door of the rectory, and he stuck his head out and he said, wait, don't tell me. I remember you. You got married here in the church service. You're the only one that I remember that ever got married during the regular church service. And, he like repeated our whole story, completely remembered us. It was wonderful. So I actually can't remember who all came to our wedding, but it wasn't that many, lots of work friends for both of us, and a few cousins, and my family came over.
Mm-hmm.
And then we had another ceremony back in Schenectady in August of that same year.
That's neat.
But we actually got married 5 separate times because we had to get married civilly first in the Kawasaki City Hall. So we had to go in, and fill out the paperwork and get legally married. And actually, Sandra finished that up by herself because the Brazilian embassy had given her documents that didn't quite work. So I had all my documents and I signed my papers, and the city clerk sent her back to the Brazilian embassy to get her paperwork fixed, and I went to work, and she came back and finished up the formalities by herself,
That's funny.
which she never lets me forget. And then years later, we were trying to get our paperwork for Brazil all set, and the Brazilian embassy, for me to get my visa, was telling us, no, you got to go back to Japan, to the embassy there, and register your marriage where you got married, which wasn't feasible at the time.
Mm-hmm.
So we walked into this. We were living in San Diego by that time. I had graduated from school, and we were in San Diego, and we walked into the city hall, took off our wedding rings. We had the 2 boys running around, and we walked in and said, we want to get married. So we walked in and did a justice of the peace thing, got our piece of paper so that we could go register that for our visa in Brazil. We did it on one of our anniversaries, so we wouldn't forget the date. And then much later on, I actually ended up getting sent to Brazil by Qualcomm, who I was working for. So I got the visa that way. And then much later on, we went back to Japan through work, and we did get actually registered in Japan through the embassy formally. So we didn't end up using that other San Diego marriage certificate, but we ended up getting registered to marry 5 times. So there we are. It's really real.
Wow. I know people that have been married 5 times, but not to the same
Not to
woman.
the same person, right? Yeah. Yep. No, it's definitely gonna stick.
That's funny. So you finish up your master's at MIT.
Yep.
Masters, plural, at MIT. And then what did you decide to do? Did you know where you wanted to go, or did you start looking in the WAN ads again?
No, it was. So I'd made a commitment to Sandra that I would try to go to Brazil and meet, spend time with her family and learn Portuguese and get to know Brazil. So coming out of MIT, I was really focused on jobs that would take me to Brazil. So kind of the same as.
Did you have kids at that point?
We had 2 kids. Our second son, Eric, was born on graduation day. Kyle was born the middle of the first year, and then Eric was born on graduation day the second year. But I was looking for opportunities that would take me to Brazil, and Qualcomm at the time was, based in San Diego, but starting to expand and really looking at, Brazil and India and other places as potential markets. And because I spoke a little bit of Portuguese by that time, they were interested in having me come. So I had moved into operations and manufacturing, and they wanted to set up manufacturing in Brazil. So we moved to San Diego, but kind of with the intention of, if anything would happen in Brazil, that they would send me. And that actually did happen about 2 years later. So we were in San Diego, and then a couple of years later, the factory startup project got announced, and I was named as the project manager for that. And we went down to Sao Paulo, where we set up the operation and started up manufacturing and got that running. And ultimately, then Qualcomm sold that business to Kyocera, a Japanese company. And so they ended up not doing too much more production after that, and they called me back to San Diego. But the company that we had worked with to do the manufacturing in Brazil, a company called Flextronics, had recently bought a couple factories from Casio in Japan. And they contacted me and said, "Hey, are you interested in going to work in Japan and taking over one of these factories?" And Sandra looked at me and she said, "Absolutely." So we didn't think twice about it, really.
Did they know about your time in Japan, or was that
They
just
did, yeah,
serendipitous? Okay.
yeah, they did. And it was crazy, Pat, because at that time most of the workforce in Japan was from South America, because
Hmm.
there were so many Brazilian or Japanese descendants in Brazil and Peru and some of the other countries that were looking for opportunities to work. And so in my factory, I was probably the only person that understood everybody in the place, because most of the workers were Portuguese or Spanish speakers, mostly Brazilians.
Hmm.
And many of them didn't speak Japanese.
Hmm.
A few did, obviously, but and I spoke Japanese, and I can speak Portuguese too. So it was an interesting experience.
That's fascinating.
And so we were there for 2 years in Nagoya with the kids this time, and our daughter had been born at the end of our first time in Brazil. We were in Brazil for 2 years. She was born in 2000, and we went back to San Diego for 2 years, and then Flextronics hired me to come over to Nagoya. So we went over there with the 3 kids, and we were there for close to 2 years running that plant. And then Flextronics asked me to move to Brazil again to run operations in Brazil, which was much larger for them at that time. Again, because they knew I spoke Portuguese.
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess that was 2004, we moved back down to Sao Paulo, and we ended up staying there for close to 10 years after
Wow.
that. So that was a fantastic experience. Really just love the country, love the people, enjoy being there.
So you make it sound so easy. Like, I don't know. It seems seems like a lot. Qualcomm. Before I forget,
Uh-huh.
Qualcomm. What are they known for? I know they have some technology in like every cell phone or something.
Yep.
What is their business model? What are they
Their
known
business model is intellectual property.
for? Okay.
They have a huge portfolio of patents in the telecommunications space and semiconductors. But they're at that time their claim to fame was, first of all, in the long haul truck um, communications. So you used to see all these little plastic dishes on the top of 18-wheeler
Mm-hmm.
cabs. So that's how they kind of made a lot of their money. And then they developed the chips for digital cell phones. And so back when I joined them, it was 1996. That's when phones were starting to move from analog to digital, and they were one of the pioneers in that space. And they ended up spinning off and selling a number of those divisions after that, because they really wanted to focus on the patent portfolio. But now they're a major player in chips and and the technology related to telecommunications and computers.
Mm-hmm. Are they public or private?
They're public.
I assume they're public. But
They're
isn't there
public.
a family involved there? Like a
Yeah, the Jacobs family. Dr. Jacobs was an MIT professor, actually. He and Dr. Viterbi had moved to San Diego do. They were professors at, I think, also at UCSD. But they started the company and developed the initial patents around compression technologies for digital communications on radio, and they kind of expanded that eventually into the cell phone space. And they did a lot of military work as well. But they founded that company, and the family's probably still a major shareholder. I haven't kept track, but Dr. Jacobs was the CEO, and then his son Paul was the CEO for a number of years, and now there are other folks running the company. But the family was
Do you
a
stay in
major.
touch with them?
No, I wasn't that close. I was employee number 4,000 something at the time, so I missed that window.
I bet you if I asked
Yeah,
them about Brett
but
Bissell, they would know.
they would not know. They wouldn't have a clue. They wouldn't have a clue. No, they were very big by that time. They set up a huge manufacturing facility in San Diego making cell phones, and I ran part of the factory that made the satellite dishes for the long haul trucks. And then I also worked on a project called Global Star, which was a competitor for Iridium. You may remember, like satellite phones, which we manufactured and deployed our global system. But yeah, no, they wouldn't remember. But it was a fantastic experience. I mean, they were growing so fast, and
So
the whole focus was speed.
So you go down there to supervise the building of this factory. How big was it? 500,000 square feet?
No, no, definitely not. No, it was probably 50,000 square feet. It was very small. Yeah,
I got
very
the
small.
math wrong.
Yeah. And then it gradually expanded from there. But the factories that I ran for Flextronics were very big after that. They were, hundreds of thousands of square feet, multiple buildings. We had 10,000 employees on the campus. In the late 2000s. So it got very big then.
But when you first went down there, so you're mid-20s or late 20s, I guess, have a couple kids. Yeah. Did you have like security or bulletproof glass on your car back then?
In the first time, no. In the first trip down there, we had regular cars, but we did live in a gated community, which is very common in Brazil. I mean, every building, apartment, community is going to have a gate with guard around it and a wall around it and some security. That's just a part of life there. But with the first 2 years, we didn't have any of that. And tragically, the president of Qualcomm de Brazil, his daughter was killed while we were there. She was murdered. And so we definitely, were a lot more conscious of it the second time we went back. And I went back as an executive too the second time. So, then we had armored cars, which isn't nearly as glamorous as it sounds. We had my wife had a tiny little Mercedes, a little city car, Class B, which is very, very small. But that was armored, and I had a little Mitsubishi Outback, not Outlander, that was armored. So not as glamorous as it sounds, but we did have armored cars, and that was mostly just for, if you'd go out at night for dinner. São Paulo is a huge, huge city, right? More than 20 million people, and you never know what you're going to run into. So we would go out at night with that. But we never ever had an issue, Pat, and I never really felt worried, to be honest with you. Obviously you'd be careful about it, and you'd be careful what you wore. You wouldn't go out, walking on the street with jewelry or big jewelry or anything like that. But as long as you were smart about it and kept your eyes up, and we never ever had an issue.
Mm-hmm.
And I still don't worry about it when I go down there.
Mm-hmm. So, what you it ran its course. You worked until when? 2017, 18, 19? How long did you work there? From 2010,
No,
did you
we
say?
worked until I was at Flextronics until 2010, and then
Okay.
that was so there was the big downturn in 2008, 2009 here in the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
Um, in Brazil, there was kind of a delay factor there, so that really hit us in Brazil in 2010, and that big campus that I mentioned that I was running, and we had to lay off like more than half of the people there. We had to lay off like 5,000 people. It was horrible. Um, we shut down buildings. We mothballed equipment. We kind of consolidated everything into one or two buildings. And it was clear that it wasn't going to work for me to stay there. They couldn't afford me. It was a a messy situation. Um, so I left Flex at the end of 2010, and then a former manager of mine from Flextronics had gone over to work at a company called CEVA, and he hired me in the beginning of 2011 to run Latin American operations for CEVA Logistics, based in Brazil. So we stayed in the same house. The kids stayed in the same school, but we worked. I was with CEVA in Brazil until 2014, running the Latin American region, um, and then in 2014, I was promoted to a global role, global chief operating officer for contract logistics, which is warehousing and ship transportation, basically. And then we moved to Zurich, which is where the global headquarters was. So there wasn't much there. It was a very small office. Everything was international. There's not much by operations perspective in Zurich, but we lived in Zurich for a year. Moved our youngest daughter. The two boys had graduated from high school by then. They were back in the U.S. in college, and we moved our youngest over to Zurich International School for a year. Um, and after about a year there, my mom was getting sick, and the two boys were back here in the States, and um, we just decided that I talked to my boss at the time, the CEO. I'm like, hey, let me just live in the States and travel, because I was traveling almost 100% of the time at that time. I was always on an international flight, and Zurich is not a cheap place anyway. So I said, let me just live I'll live near JFK, and I'll commute out of JFK or Newark, and that's what I did. So we moved back in 2015, and we lived in Stamford, Connecticut. And so our daughter Rachel went to high school there in Stamford, and so we could be close to the boys too, who were in college in the Northeast,
Mm-hmm.
and back close to family again. And basically, I just would every single week would come home on Friday night, and Monday or Sunday night or Monday I would head back down to JFK or Newark, or if it was domestic, I'd be heading to LaGuardia, um, or White Plains, and I would travel pretty much 100% of the time, all the way through until 2019. So uh, I got pretty good at changing time zones and sleeping on planes. Um, that was a really great experience too. The company had been in kind of dire straits, and so the CEO put together a new team. I was one of the team to turn the company around um, and take it public, which was kind of the objective. And we were finally successful in achieving an IPO in 2018. Um, and that was a really great experience. And then we were acquired in 2019 and the new owners it's a French company based in Marseille, and they asked us to move to Marseille, which is in the south of France. And so my wife and I packed up again, and we moved to Marseille. And it was very clear to me that wasn't going to be a good long-term position for me now in a family company that, based in France, and I wasn't going to be, part of that long-term strategy. So I started looking for other opportunities in 2019, and I was approached by a headhunter looking for a CEO for a company called Lasership, which is a large regional package delivery company on the East Coast, run by a private equity company, owned by a private equity company. And that turned into a great opportunity, and I left CEVA at the end of 2019 and started as the CEO of Lasership in the beginning of 2020. And we moved to Northern Virginia to do that. So we left Stanford and moved down to Northern Virginia. Lots of moves. When we count up all the moves that we've done, it's and the other day I was playing golf and I looked down and one of my golf clubs had a moving sticker on it, which somehow I hadn't noticed. So, those moving stickers are with you for the end of time when you move like we have. They show up in the weirdest places. These little green or yellow or orange stickers that just show up.
Are you still involved with Lasership?
I am not. No. So so I was hired to kind of turn around and develop the company, and expected it to be a 3 to 5 year commitment. And I like to joke that I had the prescience to know there was a pandemic coming, that package delivery was going to be the place to be. But I started in early 2020, and you'll remember, I think that was March was when we went into work from home and lockdown. And I was kind of thinking, oh, my goodness, I just joined this company and I'm going to have to shut it down, because no one knew what to expect then. And then by April, we were an essential service, and volumes just started growing. And speaking with the investors, we decided that, rather than just trying to raise prices and look at it as a short-term opportunity, we should take all the volume we should get. And we ended up growing the company over 100% in that first year. And by the end of the year, they decided they wanted to sell the company. And so we went through the peak period while we were preparing to sell the company. And by early 2021, we had isolated it down to one buyer who was going to take on the company, and they completed the transaction in May. And they decided they want somebody else to be the CEO in July. So I left in July, and we moved to Florida, which is where we are now.
For the moment.
Well, don't say that. We were really happy here. Actually, we're really enjoying life here. So we'll see.
Old habits die hard.
That's what my wife keeps telling me. She's like, you're not gonna stay put. But I really do enjoy the way things are going now. I'm on several boards in the logistics space, which I really, really enjoy. I love mentoring. The leadership of the companies that I work with. I love being involved, the strategic aspect, and I also love having a little bit of flexibility and time too. So it's a very nice mix. So it's been a great career.
So if you were giving advice, it sounds like it. It sounds like you could write a book.
We'll see.
Are you thinking about writing a book?
I am not. No, I'm laughing because, like, to my left is I've turned into my family's historian, and now that I'm not working full time, like my dad's emptied his attic, and I've got boxes and boxes and boxes of old you know family documents and photos that I'm trying to scan and organize. And then my cousin came down for Thanksgiving, and as she was coming down, she said, "Oh, I'm driving, and I'm bringing you 6 more boxes." I'm like, no. So um,
Oh, wow.
I've got a very interesting family. They're very, very strong women in my family. My my grandmother Hillary was a civil rights activist in Michigan, back in the 50s, and she was a politician, but very, very strong activist as well. So I've got all her papers sitting next to me, and my mother was an ordained Methodist minister. She went to divinity school when she was single before she met my dad. She went off to Pakistan as a missionary by herself, and Sandra is very strong. So I'm blessed to have a number of very strong women in my life. So if I were to write a book, I think that might be a part of it. But I don't have any plans. It's more just organizing all the stuff I've got.
Sounds like a good way to pass the time.
Yeah, yeah,
I have a box of stuff here, and I'm conflicted about it. On the one hand, I'm sentimental, and I
yep,
kind of feel like I should organize it in some way.
right, right,
And on the other hand, I'm like, uh, who won the Super Bowl last year? I can't
right,
remember.
right. Exactly. No, it's weighty when you have this stuff, right? Because you don't want to throw it away because you feel guilty about it,
Yeah.
and you feel like you should do something with it for posterity. And my kids
Mm-hmm.
are like, "Yeah, Dad, I don't know." So anyway, every once in a
Yeah.
while, I'll sit down at my desk and do something about it, and hack out a little corner of it, and then go back to life again.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe by the time I'm 90, I'll have it all cleaned up.
Um, so if you were like to summarize like your life
Hmm.
for someone, maybe giving advice, I don't know, like what are the salient points of your life that you feel would be important to a third party who didn't know anything about you?
I think I always say yes to challenges. Um, I think that's been a common theme, throughout my life is, when something comes up that seems like it'll be something that'll stretch me, force me to learn, force me to adapt, force me to grow, um, whether it's, physical or academic or professional, intellectual. Those are the things that really attract me. And I find that they open up so many new opportunities as a result. And so, it's not that I say yes to everything. I certainly don't. But when these opportunities come up to try something new that I know is going to be different, that's always very attractive to me, and I've been rewarded um, as a result. I think my my career has been very international, and that's given me a unique perspective on the way things work here in this country. That I think many people don't have. Um, and I've met so many fascinating people along the way that I've had the opportunity to become really close friends with, and you've spent time, in other languages as well. When you bond with somebody in another language, you often end up having, you know, thoughts or concepts that come through that you can't really articulate well in English. It's
Mm.
different. Um, so I had really good friends in Japan, really good friends in Brazil. Um, Recently through Facebook, I've been reconnecting with some old friends from classmates from Liberia. Um,
Mm.
so it's interesting how these things follow along, and if you're open to it, it just makes your life so much richer. Um, So I think that would be the theme probably is being open to challenges and welcoming them.
Interesting. One time I don't know if you remember this, but I said you're very entrepreneurial, and you corrected me and you said, I'm not really entrepreneurial. I take things and I try to make them better. And I thought that
Yep.
was interesting and super self-aware on your part to correct me, but I feel like there's sort of a germ of it. And
Hmm.
I mean, the very fact that you're open to lots of things, new cultures, new languages, new people, new places, and to me, that's a similar germ to what an entrepreneur does and can visualize the future. Like you must be able to sit and say, okay, I don't really know what it would be like to live in Japan, but I'm willing to give it a shot, which to me is a lot like visualizing a new business before it exists and
Hmm.
then giving it a shot. But I don't mean to, I'm not debating what
No,
your,
I guess in my mind, I've always thought of entrepreneurship as, somebody that starts a business, right? And I've
sure.
never felt like I've had that idea or that, and I've always wondered why not. I've always wondered why I don't have these ideas to start a company because I think it'd be fun. Um, but when somebody else has got an idea in front of me, something that's there, I can almost always see ways to make it better. Um, we have a friend in Brazil who owns a pizza shop, and I drove him nuts because I'd sit there, you know, watching his guys make pizza, and I'm like, "Look, you can make this better, and you can make this better, and you can make that more efficient, and you can save time." And he's like, "Yeah, yeah, Brett, go away. Just eat your pizza." Um,
Right.
but
Well,
and I tell people that when you're running businesses, a lot of times when you make an improvement, then you see another opportunity after that, and you never would have seen that other opportunity if you hadn't made the first improvement.
but that's
Um,
what I meant when I
yeah,
said what I said,
yeah,
because they're like my observation over the years in dealing with literally thousands of business owners
hmm,
is there's people that own and run companies, but they tend to be strategy people. And then there's people that are really entrepreneurial that work for those same people, and
right,
they treat the company money like their own money.
hmm,
And they're constantly not only making processes better, but they're inventing new things
yep,
every day. And they're saying, why do we do it this way? Can we do it that way? And you as a connected leader and an open-minded leader say, all right, let's give it a shot,
yep.
and it's as opposed to someone who says, well, this is the way we've always done it.
Or
Of
yeah, and
course.
or the people that say, no, 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 that won't work, right? We tried that once 10 years ago, that won't work, right? And that's definitely not me. So I agree with you from that perspective. I think things are worth trying. Obviously you have to think them through. You have to, do your analysis, but ultimately, you don't get anywhere if you don't take some risks. And so taking calculated risks and, listening to people too, I think is the other key piece. Like, a lot of the improvements that, I've made along the way in my career, they didn't come from me. They came
Mm-hmm.
from people that, were working with me that I was able to enable. Yeah, I was able to empower them and say, look, yeah, let's try your idea. And
No doubt.
that's a key piece is is being willing to listen and let people find those opportunities. And once you start that cycle, people are so willing to, and they
Mm-hmm.
love it, right? And then people get excited. They win, and when a team wins, they get really excited and they get motivated and they look for more and they start to roll. And those are the moments in your career that are so wonderful to look back on.
Amen. And it happens over and over and over. You say, I believe in you. I know you guys are on the right
Yep.
track. Let's tweak this and that and get back to me when you have something new. And all of a
Yeah.
sudden they're like, yes. And
Yeah.
like my theory, as you know, is everyone just wants to matter.
Yep.
And you're telling them they matter. And I'm just a 5-year-old child. If you tell me I matter, I'm happy.
Yeah.
And I'll move heaven and earth for you, which
Yep.
is that's the beauty of it.
Yep.
I said this to someone not long ago, but the firm I work for they have a personality test, and I failed the test 3 times. And the guy who was doing the internships at the time, because I was a senior at Union College, And he says, well, you failed the test 3 times, but we like you anyway, and we're going to give you a shot. And,
Right. Because he knew something was wrong there, right? He knew. I'm sure that
with
guy
me,
knew.
yeah.
He he sensed that something was wrong with the test. I
Maybe.
guess
I don't
he
know.
guessed that there was something that
He
you
saw
had that
something in me.
the test wasn't catching or the test was excluding, and he said, no, let's take the risk because I can sense that something's right here.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
just, I was and am totally unmanageable. I'm not a person it's hard to tell me what to do. I have to make my own mistakes and so on. So I am in that way very entrepreneurial, I think. But calculated risks, like as we talked about, new markets, new industries,
Yep.
to me, it's never ending and never, like I was telling someone today, I'm peeling the onion, but simultaneously the onion is expanding.
The onion
Like
keeps getting bigger.
the amount
Yes.
of, it's right, it's
Yeah.
huge.
Yeah.
And so much so that I'm having trouble executing and I need to let go of more of the operational things that I was doing, so that I can only do the stuff that I'm really good at.
Mm-hmm. No, that makes complete sense to me. I think, and you look at people that are successful, and they have that mindset of abundance, right? Of that
Mm-hmm.
that the glass is not half empty. The glass can be bigger, right?
It can be bigger and it keeps refilling itself. It's
Yes.
crazy. It's overflowing.
Yep. And that's
And
something that I've seen so many times in my career where you work with people that see that and they get that and they find ways to make it work. Whereas the people that go into it, with a negative mindset, they just constantly run into walls and it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? And so I think I'm very optimistic as well. I always, even when I end up saying, okay, it's not going to work, I will always find ways to convince myself that it could work. And I'll look for
mm-hmm.
ways to do that. And then you might decide ultimately, okay, yeah, it's too big of a shot, but you can always see a way to make something work if you work at it.
There's always some silver lining, right?
Mm-hmm.
And even if you have to deliver news that maybe people don't want to hear,
Right.
you can deliver it in a way that's, I repeat myself all the time, but people either bring you up or bring you down. And like, I want to be a person that brings you up a little bit every time I
Right.
see you. And
Right.
that way you want to see me again. And we have a
Yep.
conversation like this and it's fun. And,
Yep. Yeah, I
doing
heard
new
the
things.
term once, energy vampires, right? People that suck your energy, and we all know a few people like that. And
Mm-hmm.
you sometimes you keep your relationships with them, but it's not something you want to seek out because you end up with them and you're like, oh, I'm tired right afterwards. That, and I love to be around people that are positive and see opportunities and see the positive side, and even when they know things are tough, they know they can get through it, and
Well, that's the fun of
that's
it.
usually me. Yeah, and that's where the fun comes, right? The fun
Yeah.
comes when you see that challenge and you run through it and you make it through and yes, we did it.
It's funny. And I don't know if people give me these ideas or if I make them up myself, but there's something I use a lot. It's called for me, the dot matrix phenomenon.
Hmm.
When I first see a problem, it looks insurmountable. And then I read about it, I look at it, and then it starts to take shape over
Right.
time. Not unlike a dot matrix, when you get to the right distance, all of a sudden, boom,
Yep.
it comes into focus. And
Hmm.
but for me, it's a process. I'm not a person that can look at something once and solve it. I mean, some people have that gift, but I have to read about it and think about it. And I feel like my subconscious does a lot of
Yep.
the problem solving, like when I'm sleeping.
Hmm.
And all of a sudden it becomes obvious, like whether it's designing a house or a business problem, it's very similar.
Do you find, like, many times in my life, I find that when I wake up in the morning and my mind's been processing and I wake up in the morning with a list, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
I want to do this, I want to do this, I want to do this. I'm like, I can't wait to get at it. That's when I know I'm in the right place.
Mm-hmm.
Even if I'm stressed or even if I'm, tired or what have you, if I'm waking up in the morning with that list of of things to go chase, I know I'm good. But if I wake up in the morning and go, oh man, I don't want to do it. I don't want to. That's when I know something's wrong. And usually I can figure out how to remotivate myself in that situation by looking for what I can fix.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, what can I fix here? And once I start looking for that, then I find myself re-engaged again. And there's
Me
almost
too.
always right? There's always something to fix.
No doubt.
There's
And
always
it's
something to make better.
and I feel like that's the way the mind works. When you're overwhelmed with anything, you can't focus, and when you can't focus, it feels like you're not making progress, and that
Right.
creates stress, and that's self-fulfilling prophecy, right?
Yep.
And if I create stress, then I can't function well, and it goes negative. Instead, I look at one thing, and I call it a small thing. What can I control?
Hmm.
And that which I can control, I can improve upon, and then of course there's contiguous issues or problems that once I solve the primary one, then I can solve a
Right.
contingent one, and so on and so forth. But it's
Yep.
more orientation. I used to have a defeatist mentality when I first started out. Fundamentally would get up on the wrong side of the bed, and I'd
Hmm.
want to quit stuff, especially when I was very young.
Right.
And to their credit, my parents never let me quit anything. and I feel that way about sports. I was never good really at any sport, but I just played all the sports long enough, so I started to get good. And I look at a guy like Larry Bird, I'm thinking his parents probably wouldn't let him quit.
Right. Right. Right.
And
Yeah.
eventually he just figured it out.
And you look at these people that you say, how did he get to be so good? But then you look at all the practice and all the hours and hours and hours and dedication, right? And you and I are both long distance
Mm-hmm.
runners, because that's a great way that even if you don't have the perfect, as long as you got the mindset, you keep going, right? And that's a way that both of us have found to be good at something, is just keep pushing.
Definitely. We'll outlast him no matter
Right,
what.
right, exactly. That's right. I'll keep going. It'll be painful, but I'm just going to keep going.
So I like to say the significance of or the most important punctuation in the English language is the hyphen. Have you heard me say that?
I have,
You remember why?
because it's what comes between the beginning and the end.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So with that in mind, if I didn't know you, what
Mhm.
would you want me to know about you? Like if you were to sum up your life to a complete stranger who didn't know anything about you, or if you were gone and I were to tell
Mhm.
someone about you, what would you want someone else to know?
I made things better every time that I'm in a situation. I always have sought to make it better and leave it better than I found it. I often would tell myself that it's my job to put myself out of a job, to make myself unnecessary by enabling the people under me and the people around me to keep going with whatever we had accomplished. And that's
Mm-hmm.
always how I've seen it, is just make it better, leave it better than I found it,
Mm-hmm.
and help the people that are there as well. It's not just the processes. Is I've always loved coaching and mentoring people that I work with, and it's a huge joy to see them succeed when they do. Um, a number of people that I've worked with, will tell me, Brett, you were the worst, the toughest boss I've ever had, but they'll say that you really helped. And
Mm.
I've had bosses that did that for me too. So it's I feel like I'm passing on the gift.
It's almost like our oral history, We we're still we haven't changed. I don't know. I'll speak for myself. Maybe I'm just not that highly evolved, but that's how I learn too. And that's
Hmm.
how I try to pass it on. And it's very
Yep.
subtle.
Yep.
Like these are more concepts than it's
And
not
mindset,
technical
right? And
knowledge. Yeah.
mindset. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's the mindset of you can succeed and you will get through it and go find the way. Right. There's a lot of people that have never learned that, and when they do see it,
Mm-hmm.
they're unstoppable.
Mm-hmm. So before we wrap up, is there anything you might like to ask me or say that we
Um,
haven't talked about?
Yeah, I think just the to give credit to the people around me. I've been blessed by so many people who along the way made things possible for me, at teachers, at union, people that um I don't think I'm a genius or a superhuman. I've just been blessed by so many people over the years that saw that I was willing to try and gave me opportunities to do it. And I've made so many mistakes. If I focus on if I focus on the regrets, they're endless. If I focus on the things I would have done differently, they're endless. But so many things went right. And I've got a
Hmm.
wonderful family, and I'm blessed with an amazing wife who strengthens me and guides me and supports me, and I'm very, very
And
grateful.
likes to move, apparently.
No, she's kind of telling me like it's time to stop moving, but she's part of the problem too, though. So um, we're both kind of cut from the same cloth there. But
Hmm.
it's pretty amazing how we found each other, on the other side of the world.
Yeah, it is. So, can you get direct flights from where you are to where you go in Brazil?
Yeah, and that was a big part of the choice here. Is we're near Orlando, so
Hmm.
there's direct flights down there, and yeah, it's very easy to get down there.
Hmm. That's great. Well, thank you so much for your time. I'm glad we're in touch 35 years later.
Yep,
Um, Gosh, our 40th will be coming up soon, right?
yep, yep. It's coming soon.
Um,
We're gonna have to go on a run then. We'll have to like drag the class along and see who shows up.
yeah, well, I'm hoping I'll see you before then. You'll be
We
back
will.
here, right?
We will. Yep,
All right.
for
Thanks
sure.
for your time. Great
Pat, it
to
was a
see you, Brett.
pleasure. Thank you.
Likewise. Thank you. If you enjoy the most fascinating podcast in the world, please follow on Spotify, subscribe on YouTube, and follow on Apple Podcast.